All right. Thank you all for coming and spending your lovely Thursday evening with us. Tonight, we are talking about children's home and community based services waivers. So, HCBS waivers, as you will hear those. Um, all right. If I don't know you or you don't know me, my name is Megan Bowser. I'm the executive director for Family Voices Colorado, and I'm also a mom of a couple kiddos that are on Medicaid waivers. So I live this day to day in my personal life and work for an organization that tries to help other families navigate through these crazy systems. So that organization is Family Voices Colorado. We are family led, so all of our staff are parents of somebody with a disability of some way, shape, or form, and a whole wide range of ages and diagnoses and such too. But we lead with that peer lived experience perspective that we know how frustrating these systems can be, and we want to help other families as you navigate those to get the resources that your family needs to make sure your kiddo is getting what they need to thrive. So that looks like a lot of systems navigation. So this is working one on one with families to help understand the Medicaid process or the disability program process or the healthcare system process. Really, anything in that healthcare disability benefits sort of program world, that's where we spend our time and our focus. And again, that one on one navigation. Then we do education and training. So, trainings like this, where we're here to help give broad information to a broader audience about a specific topic. We also do some in-person trainings for different schools and providers and wherever else, support groups and such too. And then we do advocacy and policy. So when we see the same issues impacting family after family after family, we want to keep helping those individual families, but we also really want to make the system itself better so we don't have 100 other families all running into the exact same problem. So we do a lot of policy work with healthcare policy and financing, the agency that manages Medicaid in Colorado, but we'll also do some state and federal legislative advocacy and advocacy within other organizations too. We're the Family to Family Health Information Center for Colorado and an affiliate of Family Voices National. So that just means that if you go to another state, you have friends that live in another state, you're thinking about moving to another state, there's an organization like us that's likely in that state too. So happy to connect you with those people. And then this is our main info. All right. Before we get started into the meat of this all, just a couple housekeeping things that I didn't put a slide in for tonight. I don't know why not. Feel free as we're going through to raise your hand or put questions in the chat. I love questions. I get tired of hearing myself talk for an hour and a half straight. So give me a break and give me some questions to answer too. If you are not actively talking and asking a question, we ask you to keep yourself muted just so we don't hear all the lovely background noises that are in our houses inevitably. And then we are recording this and planning to put it up on our YouTube channel. So please be careful with what sort of private health information you share because it will be broadcasted to all of the internets. So please don't share specific details about you or your family member or your child. All right. On that note, let's keep going. All right. We like to talk about Medicaid sort of as a house. And so there's lots of different ways to get in a house. And these are all the different ways in Colorado for kids to get Medicaid on the side here. So we'll talk specifically about the Medicaid waivers today, but there's other Medicaid programs or other ways to get in Medicaid in Colorado too. So the front door to Medicaid might be this MAGI, Modified Adjusted Gross Income Medicaid. This is what most people think of when they think of Medicaid. It's based purely on family income. There's no disability requirements or anything like that. It's just pure income. There's also, if you qualify for SSI or supplemental security income through the Social Security Department, then you can get Medicaid as it's called mandatory SSI Medicaid through that. The Medicaid buy-in for children with disabilities. It's a way to get Medicaid if you're over income for regular Medicaid and have a disability, but don't necessarily meet the criteria for a Medicaid waiver. So it's a way to still get some Medicaid, even if you don't qualify for a waiver. And the family income limits for that are much higher than they are for regular Medicaid. And they just revamped it a little bit too. So a family of four can make gross about $16,000 a month and still qualify for Medicaid under that Medicaid buy-in for children with disabilities. I have an error on the slide. I think I switched it from the adult to the children's buy-in. You don't have to be employed to be on the children's buy-in. I need to fix that on my slide. Sorry. Okay, and then there's this world of Medicaid waivers, which we'll go into more. And then if somebody has been through the foster care system, then whether they're still in foster care or whether they've been adopted, they can get Medicaid as part of that system up until they turn 21. All right. So let's take a step back and look at what is Medicaid. So Colorado also calls their Medicaid program Health First Colorado. But Medicaid, Health First Colorado, they're synonymous with each other. And the state has, I'm struggling with my PowerPoint tonight. The state has this benefits pyramid that they use to talk about the different pieces you can get of Medicaid. So when we talk about the Medicaid house, there are lots of different ways to get the state plan Medicaid. But then there's these additional services you can get on top of that. If you qualify for an HCBS waiver, then you get that and all the things that are under it. So some people just get state plan. You could, in theory, get state plan and community first choice. Long-term supports and services for kids is kind of the same as a waiver. They really are synonymous with each other. So you could get a waiver and community first choice and Medicaid state plan. All right. So what's special about Medicaid? So Medicaid is federal and state. So it's always important to know that it's not a purely federal program. It's not a purely state program. It's both. And funding comes from both. So most of our Medicaid programs in Colorado are 50 cents on the dollar comes from the state and 50 cents of every dollar comes from the federal government. So it's sort of a 50-50 match. There are some programs that are slightly less and more, but most programs here are that. Okay. Then Medicaid is like the best health insurance you can have. Even if you have private health insurance, it's often really advantageous to have that private or commercial health insurance as primary and then Medicaid as secondary, because Medicaid covers so much more than really even the best private health insurances usually cover, particularly for kids. So also Medicaid has no copays, no deductibles. And then for kids, all medically necessary services are covered. So there's way more home health. They'll cover more durable medical equipment. So things like wheelchairs and communication devices. You get glasses coverage, you get dental coverage and supplies, things like formula and diapers that are normally not covered by most commercial or private health insurance plans. Medicaid will cover. If you have both Medicaid and private health insurance, that commercial health insurance will be the primary, and then Medicaid will be the secondary. So that means anything your private insurance doesn't cover will then go to Medicaid to see if they'll cover it, including if you've got copays or deductibles or coinsurance on your private. When they pay that remaining amount that might be left, so you might have a $30 copay per visit. If somebody has their private insurance and then Medicaid, you don't have to pay that copay. That copay will be paid by Medicaid instead. All right. For kids up until birth, up until the day they turn 21, they're covered under a special type of Medicaid called this EPSDT, or a special program within Medicaid. So it's early and periodic screening, diagnostic, and treatment. It's really a very long acronym to say that for kids, anything you can justify as being medically necessary has to be covered. So if you've dealt with the commercial or private insurance world, you'll often see things there like somebody's only allowed to get 20 visits of physical therapy a year. And you cap out your 20 visits and then insurance won't pay for any more. Medicaid in Colorado isn't allowed to do that. They can't say you only get a certain number of visits. They can say you have to do additional steps to justify that you need more after you hit a certain point, but they can't say you only get a certain point for state plan Medicaid benefits. That doesn't apply to waiver specific benefits. But for state plan, if it's medically necessary, it has to be covered all the way up until their 21st birthday. So that could include multiple pairs of glasses in a year if there's a medical reason why they need more. That could include a new wheelchair a year after you got the old one if they had a huge growth spurt or a change in their condition or something of that sort. So under EPSDT, there's a lot of flexibility to get things covered, especially for kids, which is part of what makes Medicaid for kids so valuable. All right. Pause on Medicaid for a second and let's talk about CHP Plus because I hear a lot of confusion between these two programs from families and professionals, from lots of people. So let's talk about them. So CHP Plus is public health insurance, but there's a couple rules for it. So one is you have to be uninsured. So with Medicaid, you could have private or commercial insurance as primary and Medicaid as secondary. You don't have to have it. You can have Medicaid alone too if you want. On CHP Plus, if you have private insurance or commercial health insurance, you are not eligible for CHP Plus. So it's only for people that are otherwise uninsured. For pregnant women, children up until age 18 that make too much money for Medicaid, but really have low enough income that they can't afford to pay for most private insurance plans. CHP Plus has copays. They're not very large copays compared to most programs, but it does have copays. The biggest thing is it doesn't cover nearly as much as Medicaid. So there's ABA is not typically covered under CHP Plus. There are limits to the number of therapy visits you can get under CHP Plus. Things like diapers are usually not covered. So there's a lot of limits on CHP Plus, which means it's awesome for typically developing kids that don't have medical needs, don't have developmental needs, don't need a lot of therapies, that need to go to the doctor for annual visits. When they get sick, they break their arm, standard sort of kid things. CHP Plus is fine. But when you've got a disability or other medical conditions or developmental needs, CHP Plus is sort of a program of last resort. So CHP Plus is not Medicaid, and it doesn't fall under the same rules as Medicaid. So EPSDT, that anything that's medically necessary has to be covered, does not apply to CHP Plus. It's its own separate program outside of the Medicaid pyramid. All right, so let's go back to our Medicaid pyramid, these Medicaid benefits pyramid, and talk about one of the other programs that's in this as well. So we talked a little bit about state plan Medicaid, what's covered there. Going up their little pyramid, the next step is Community First Choice. So Community First Choice, or CFC, was just launched in July of this year. Many of you are probably in the process of transitioning onto CFC or have transitioned or are planning for the transition in the coming months. By July of next year, everybody will have had their chance to sort of transition, and then people will just enroll kind of as you enroll, as we do for most programs. CFC, or Community First Choice, took some things that used to be in specific Medicaid waivers and moved them into state plan Medicaid. And that means no matter how you get to state plan Medicaid, which door you go into when we talk about that Medicaid house, you can get access to these if you meet the qualification criteria for it. So it doesn't matter if you're on a specific waiver. It doesn't matter if you're on income-based Medicaid. If you meet the qualifications to get these services, you can get them. So here's the whole list of services. I have the three kind of highlighted in red that are the most commonly used, that most people will kind of look into or see if they qualify for when they switch to Community First Choice. But there are other things too, like transition setup as if you're in an institution and moving into a community setting. There's some funding to help you kind of get settled in that, or home delivered meals to help people have good, healthy, prescribed, like following a set of orders by their doctor for specific meals. It Community First Choice also expanded the what we call service delivery models or options, which are kind of ways to get those three services that are highlighted in red. So out of those three services, you can get them through agency based, through IHSS, or through CDOS. We have a whole presentation specifically on those three and the differences between them that is up on our YouTube channel that I highly recommend reading, or not reading, watching, if you have not already and you have questions about that. Oh, I see a question in the chat. You said ABA is not typically covered in CHP Plus. Is there a route to get ABA covered? I don't think so. I have yet to see it be approved for anybody on CHP Plus, but I know there are also like rules about ABA having to be covered, and I've never deep dove into what those rules are and why it may or may not have some exemption to that rule around ABA coverage. But I have yet to see somebody on CHP Plus be able to do ABA, unfortunately. All right. CFC, it's important to note it is not a Medicaid HCBS or home and community based services waiver. So when we look at this pyramid, Community First Choice sits at a different place in the pyramid than those waivers do. So it's not a waiver itself. It's something that can be tagged on to a waiver or can happen without a waiver, but it doesn't count as a waiver itself. Then to be eligible, you have to be on Medicaid. If you're on a Medicaid waiver, then you can enroll in Community First Choice or CFC whenever you hit your waiver renewal this next year. After we hit July 1st of this year, anybody can enroll in CFC at any time, but they're kind of doing a gradual rollout for this first year. If you're on some other type of Medicaid, so Medicaid through SSI, Medicaid through the buy-in, Medicaid through MAGI, which is low income, you have to meet what's called institutional level of care, which means you need help with your activities of daily living or some supervision. So if somebody meets this institutional level of care, no matter how they get to Medicaid, then they can also enroll in Community First Choice. And that enrollment happens through the case management agency. And they'll look and create a service plan for those services. All right. Whew. Questions on what Medicaid is, what CFC is, before we get into all of the Medicaid waivers for kids? Anyone? I'm going to take a drink of my water because that helps me be patient enough to wait and listen. Not water, my sparkling ice. All right. I keep going then. So Medicaid home and community-based services, or HCBS waivers. So there are now 9 waivers in the states. Each of them have their own targeting criteria, but they have other things that are sort of universally the same for eligibility for all of these waivers. So if we sort of look at the hierarchy of who's going to qualify, when you look back at that pyramid, there's also the size of it makes a difference. So way more people will be on state plan Medicaid than will qualify for an HCBS waiver. So it's sort of the smallest check box at the top that it's the most stringent criteria in order to qualify. So one of the rules, you have to be a Colorado resident, which really means you have to have a Colorado address and you have to not be getting public benefits in another state. There's no certain amount of time you have to live in Colorado to be considered a Colorado resident as far as Medicaid is concerned. You have to have a disability. So the Social Security Administration has these standards for what qualifies as a disability. So this is sort of the lowest bar, or I guess the highest bar, the easiest bar to jump over for disability. So it's not super stringent criteria, but you have to be considered to have a disability. For adults, there's kind of more strict, but for kids, it's really, does your disability or diagnosis impact your day-to-day functioning? And if it does, you likely will qualify under these guidelines. That disability can be determined through the Social Security Department, though they tend to be exceedingly slow, or it can be determined through your county human services department, who will send the application off to a company called ARG, or Action Review Group. But you have to do that disability qualification for any of the Medicaid waivers. Then you also have to meet that level of care. So the same level of care they do for community first choice, they do for the Medicaid waivers. So right now it's an assessment called the 100.2, and it's looking at those activities of daily living. So eating, bathing, dressing, toileting, and then it has a couple supervision things in there too. And they ask you lots and lots of questions, and they'll score each of those areas from 0 to 3. And you have to score a 2 on at least 2 areas or 2 on one of the supervision areas in order to be considered having met level of care. Then there's financial criteria. But for Medicaid waivers, the financial criteria is based on the individual, not their whole family. So this makes a huge difference for kids. If the family income is too high for Medicaid, under a home and community-based services waiver, they're not looking at the family income anymore. They're looking at the child's income only. Most of our kids have no income or very limited income, and it also has counts their assets too. So most of our kids don't have assets. You do need to be careful though that grandma doesn't leave an inheritance to your kiddo, or you don't open a savings account in their name and put a bunch of money in it. So you do need to be careful about them not having assets that are in their particular name. But mom and dad can make $1 million a month in income. As long as none of it is in the child's name, the child can still meet the financial criteria for a waiver. Then there's targeting criteria. So each of those 9 waivers in the state has specific criteria of the type of person or the type of disability they're trying to cover with that specific waiver. So some are more medical, some are more behavioral, some are more mental health. There's a whole wide range of what kind of kid they're trying to target, and they each have different rules around that. All right, so waivers give you access to state plan Medicaid. So you get access to the bottom of that pyramid. You get access to community first choice services. And then you get access to waiver specific services. So each waiver has its own targeting criteria. It also has its own list of waiver specific services that are there to help supplement the other services that that person or individual gets. On any of the waivers, you have to use at least one service per month to maintain the waiver eligibility. So if you get on a waiver, you have to actually use something on that waiver in order to keep it. If you're not using it, you will lose it. And if that's the only way the kiddo gets Medicaid, they can lose their whole Medicaid if they're not actually using their waiver. And then I always like to point out, each and every service has to be necessary and appropriate for that individual person. So just because music therapy is listed as a service on the waiver your kiddo is on doesn't mean you automatically get music therapy. You need to be able to justify why music therapy is needed because of their disability and would benefit them in particular. Same thing with all the other services that are on the waivers and on Medicaid too. So they each have to be necessary, and you have to justify why it's needed and why the amount you're requesting is needed for any individual. All right, keep going. Really, I'm fighting with my PowerPoint tonight. Okay, so there were 4 children's waivers. I marked this, but I didn't change the number. There are now 3 children's waivers. So the 2 medical waivers that we used to have, the CHCBS, or Children's Home and Community-Based Services, and the CLLI, Children with Life-Limiting Illness, were both merged together to make this Children with Complex Health Needs, or CWCHN waiver. Anybody who would qualify for either one of these now qualifies for this new waiver. So it's this, it's sort of just a combo of these 2 together to make the new waiver. There are some people that are still on the CHCBS waiver, and when they do their annual renewal, we'll switch to the CWCHN waiver. So it's a sort of gradual process. Then there's 2 waivers that I like to call the developmental waivers, because these are more focused less on medical needs and more on developmental milestones and needs in that sort of realm. And we'll talk more about each of these in just a minute. I see your question, Jennifer. Do you have to get justification from someone else, or can the parent make the case? It depends on the particular service. So some of them, like respite, for example, the parent can ask and have a conversation with the case manager, and it's between those two that they decide whether it really is justified. The case manager sort of gets the end decision on if they agree, but like respite is just between the parent and the case manager. Other things like music therapy, for example, you usually need a justification letter that's signed by a doctor or a physical, occupational, or speech therapist to submit to justify why they need something like music therapy. So each of the services kind of has their own justification process. All right. So let's start with the medical waiver. So the CWCHN. So each of these waivers you'll see has a different age category that they cover. Don't ask me why. They're all just slightly different from each other, even though we call them all children's waivers. So this one goes up until they turn 19, so up until their 19th birthday. You can switch to an adult waiver sooner, but this one ends at 19. And they have to meet this skilled nursing or hospital level of care. Don't get too hung up on this sort of phrase for each of them, what level of care they have to meet. If they meet the rest of the targeting criteria, they probably meet that level of care. And if they need help with their activities of daily living, they probably meet it. Another way to think about those level of cares is to go back to like 1950 in your brain, before we did such a great job of making sure we weren't institutionalizing everyone with a disability. And think of back in 1950, would they have recommended this person to go to a nursing home or an institution of some sort? If the answer is yes, then they probably meet this targeting criteria, or that piece of the criteria. Then the other criteria of this is this nursing facility or hospital, and they may or may not have a life-limiting illness. So really getting at people that have significant medical needs. So that could be a life-limiting illness. It could also be somebody who needs to see a lot of medical specialists. That's usually a criteria. I kind of say, like, if you've got multiple specialists, like you need to go see an endocrinologist and a neurologist regularly, like on a somewhat repeating regular basis, you likely meet the criteria for this. I've heard others say like somebody has to have a feeding tube to qualify for this. That is not the case. There's lots of people that qualify that don't have feeding tubes, but they do need to have some medical needs. Somebody that has autism and doesn't have any real medical needs likely will not qualify for this waiver. All right. Then each of the waivers, like I said, has its own list of services that are available. So here's the list for this one. I'm not going to go through all of it, but I will highlight this is the only one that has palliative care. So this is somebody coming in and talking about what makes their life have quality. How do we make sure they're comfortable and getting the things they need to have a good life, not just be alive? This is also the only one that has this therapeutic counseling that can be individual and family counseling as well. So if the whole family unit could use some counseling services to help specifically with managing the stressors around this child's diagnosis, this is the one waiver that can cover that as well. This wellness education benefit is a relatively new waiver or new service too. And it's really a newsletter that gets mailed to you every month. And the newsletter has some articles around different things within Colorado. Some of them are like, make sure you wear sunscreen. And some of them are like, here's what community first choice is. So a variety of different articles in it. But getting that newsletter mailed to you every month counts as your one service a month that's required in order to keep your waiver as well. All right. So moving on from medical waivers to the more developmental waivers. So these are focused on more developmental diagnoses versus just straight medical diagnoses. So this one we hear a lot of people call the Cadillac of all the waivers. It has lots of services that are available in it. So it's called the CES, or Children's Extensive Services. This one goes up until their 18th birthday. And this is at risk of institutionalization or meet that intermediate care facility level of need. So again, think about, do they need help with their activities of daily living? If we were in 1950, would somebody recommend they should be institutionalized? That's who this is targeting. All right. Then this is another piece. So up until somebody turns 5, they must have a developmental delay, which is like have to be in the 25th percentile, I think, for at least one area of development. But once they turn 5, they have to have a developmental disability. So a developmental disability, to qualify for that, somebody has to have a low IQ, so an IQ of 70 or below, or a low adaptive skills score, so same 70 or below. The most common one done for this is called the Vineland, and it just asks about their kind of functioning in day-to-day life. Do they know to look both ways before they cross the street? Can they put their pants on the right direction? Those sort of more executive functioning, how do they function in life sort of skills rather than just pure straight IQ. So anybody who's 5 or older on this waiver must have that IQ or adaptive skills testing, and anybody 0 to 4 just has to have that developmental delay piece. All right, and then this one has pretty strict targeting criteria as well. So this almost constant line of sight supervision, so somebody that you really can't take your eyes off of for very long at all. And then this direct intervention. So somebody has to get up and do something for them, not just look to make sure they're okay, not just look at a monitor, but actually do something for them or intervene every 2 hours during the day and on average every 3 hours at night. So even if somebody has super intense needs during the day, if they sleep beautifully at night and nobody has to get up and deal with medical things, nobody has to get up and put them back in bed because they're going to elope, then they won't qualify for this waiver. So it has to be daytime and nighttime needs. The Vineland can be from an IEP. I see that question in the chat. So yes, oftentimes the IEP teams will do the Vineland when they do their your 3-year triennial IEP. So that's what we usually recommend. Also, if somebody's had full neuropsych testing, they'll almost always do the Vineland in that as well. So that's the most common test that's done, and usually by either the schools or through a neuropsych eval. If somebody's getting ABA, they'll often do the Vineland there too. So you can usually find some providers to do that. You can find people that will do IQ testing too, but there's fewer people that can do IQ testing, and it's a more intensive and longer process versus the Vineland is done mostly based on parent interview and other professionals in their lives interviewing. All right. So services on the CES waiver. It's got a bunch. This is the longest list. So you can read all of these. You don't need me to read them to you. It also has this wellness education benefit. Something else I want to point out. So I marked it out, wrote the new thing. So homemaker. There used to be 2 types of homemaker that were on the CES waiver. It was homemaker basic and homemaker enhanced. Both of those pieces, or most of those pieces, have moved to community first choice, except for this piece of homemaker enhanced before that was really called extraordinary cleaning. So they've renamed this benefit and call it just now extraordinary cleaning that is left in the waiver. All other pieces of homemaker are now in community first choice. So somebody on CES can still get those. They just will get them through CFC instead of through the waiver, which doesn't make a whole lot of difference when you're the actual member, but it makes a difference in how it's billed and what budgets it comes out of and stuff too. The extraordinary cleaning that's left is really just for disinfecting because of bodily fluids or because somebody's immune compromised and really has a medical need for a very clean environment. So this could be if somebody has incontinence or vomiting frequently or other behaviors where there's kind of bodily fluids that need cleaned a lot. This extraordinary cleaning is there to cover that. All other kind of homemaker tasks have been moved to community first choice. See, I missed things on my slides too. Hippotherapy is no longer on this waiver. Hippotherapy is now in state plan Medicaid instead. So it's just music and massage therapy in these professional services right here. Some of these services have individual limits. So like community connector, as things are today, is limited to an average of 10 hours per week throughout the year. Respite has its own limits that are kind of complicated. We won't go into exactly, but there are limits on respite itself. Assistive technology is limited to $1,000, and then there's limits on home and vehicle modifications that are kind of funny limits. So for those, you've got up to $10,000 every 5-year cycle of the waiver. So that means everybody's on the same cycle of the waiver being approved and um, gets that $10,000 available to them on that cycle. So this cycle that everybody's on right now started, I think, July 1st of 2024. And so it'll end June 30th of 2029. And then everybody will get a new pool of $10,000 on July 1st of 2029 for home and vehicle modifications combined. Then this also has the wellness education. It's just that newsletter that they send. If you've been on CES for a while, you probably don't have this. When you do your annual renewal, your case manager should add that wellness education benefit on when you do your renewal piece for the next year. And if they didn't, you just ask them to, and they can do what's called a revision on your service plan, and they can add that wellness benefit so you start getting that newsletter. All right. The other limit for CES is all of these services combined have to be under the waiver cap for the year. So right now in 2025, that is $61,176 per year. If you're in Denver County, I think it's slightly higher. There's weird rules about Denver County, but this is the general cap for the year for all these services combined. So if you've been doing homemaker, that's kind of handy because now it's not part of this cap anymore. Only extraordinary cleaning is part of this cap. So the regular homemaker has been moved outside of that. So it's all the rest of the things have to be under this limit. All right. Then the last kids waiver we're going to talk about is this. It's called CHIRP, or Children's Habilitation Residential Program Waiver. So this one goes all the way until age 21. I told you they were all different for whatever reason. Then there's 2 ways to meet this other criteria here. So they can either have this developmental delay or developmental disability, the exact same as the CES, so the low IQ or low adaptive skills. Or starting this year, they gave another pathway for meeting that called the serious emotional disturbance, or SED. So for SED, they have to have a significant mental health condition, and then there's a few other criteria. So the most common is that they've been in a recent psychiatric hospitalization, or that they're what they call multi-system involved. So they're kind of at high risk of that hospitalization due to that mental behavioral health condition. So even if their IQ is too high, their adaptive skills is too high, if they have this serious emotional disturbance diagnosis or meet the criteria for that, then they can still access this CHIRP waiver, which is a new change. All right, then the other targeting criteria is this extraordinary need. They must meet level of care. So this intermediate care facility, again, do they need help with some activities of daily living? And then this at risk of out of home placement is the biggest piece here. So that doesn't mean they have to be in the child welfare or foster care system, but they need to be at risk. So oftentimes that at risk is that there's safety concerns for themselves or for others. Sometimes it's just that their needs are really, really intense, and it's really hard. Not impossible, but really hard for the family to manage all of their needs, and they could use some significant support to make sure they still are able to meet all of those needs. So that's what they're really talking about with this at risk of out of home placement. It sounds scarier than it is. All right. So then the services available on CHIRP, again, wellness education benefit they can add. Many of these are the same as what's on the CES. So community connector, these professional services, hippotherapy shouldn't be there either. It's part of state plan. And respite are very similar. Then there's these intensive supports, this transition support. So this is if somebody's going from like residential treatment back home, there's some more supports to help with that transition piece too. The big different one in this CHIRP waiver is this habilitation services. So this is like residential services for somebody. So this can be in a foster home. It can also be in what's called a residential child care facility or RCCF, but it's a daily rate where wherever they are is getting paid that daily amount for providing for all of their care needs. That cannot be the family home, so that daily rate is not available to parents of the child. It's just if they're placed in a foster care or group home or this residential child care facility setting that they can get that habilitation services. So a lot of people are on CHIRP and don't use that service, but if you think maybe that would be helpful at some point in the nearest future, that would be a really good reason to look at the CHIRP waiver. All right. Whew. All the waivers. Questions about kind of what the waivers are, the criteria, what services are available on them before we talk about how do you actually even apply or get on a waiver? I'll take a drink again and give you a minute to think. You can raise your hand or put questions in the chat. All right. We'll keep going. So, how do you apply? Where do you apply? So, each county is assigned a case management agency, and that case management agency does all the applications for all of the waivers and for community first choice and for some other programs like FSSP or family support funding. All go through your case management agency. So there's a one assigned based on what county you live in, and this links to the directory of that. When I'm done, I can put a link to the PowerPoint slide deck in the chat so you guys can look at those too. But I can't get to the link while I'm presenting it. You are supposed to go with your case management agency that's assigned based on where you live. If you're close to the border between your agency and another agency, you can sometimes get the request to be with a different case management agency. But if you live, in Southwest Colorado and you want to be with Jefferson County Case Management Agency that's all the way over here, they're going to say no because they have to drive to your house to do some of these visits. So they're not going to do that all the way that way. But if you're in Jefferson County and you want to be served by Developmental Pathways, who's in Douglas and Arapahoe and Elbert County, they'll probably say yes, especially because you're pretty darn close to them. So you can make that request if you're nearby, but they don't have to accept you. So they do the vast majority of the waiver application process. All right, but there are multiple steps to all of these processes. I always say we have great programs in Colorado, much better than pretty much most other states. None of those kids' waivers have waiting lists, which is not the case in most states and has not been the case for most of Colorado's kind of history and stories. So, but we make it really complicated to access these programs. We've got really great ones, but it is super complicated. So if you're applying for a Medicaid home and community-based waiver, you have to do a financial application. So the financial application you can either do through your human services, there's a phone number you can call, or you can do it online on this PEAK application. If you're brand new applying for this, they're going to ask for all the family's financial information. And then as you go through the process, they'll end up denying everybody else who doesn't have a disability and is applying for a waiver, and then ignore the income associated with all those people and just look at the income that's associated with the individual applying for the waiver. But you still have to put it all in when you initially apply, as frustrating as that is. Okay, anybody who's applying for a waiver also has to do this disability determination. So that application that goes through ARG or that application that through the Social Security Department, but they have to do that application. And then you have to do the waiver specific stuff. So that's that level of care where they ask about all the activities of daily living and ask about whatever the targeting criteria is for that specific waiver you're trying to apply for. We'll add that if you're applying for SSI, there's a whole different process for getting Medicaid through SSI. But for the waivers, they're going to need all of these pieces. Even the financial piece, even if somebody's on SSI already, they got to know a couple other things there too. All right. So you apply, you get on this waiver. Hooray! You have to renew it. It doesn't last forever. It doesn't last until that max age. You have to do renewals to show that you still qualify at a certain amount of time. So that financial piece has to be done every year for anybody on any Medicaid program except SSI. They do their own process. But that financial piece, you have to renew every single year. The level of care and the waiver piece also has to be renewed every single year. Even though these both are annually, they're usually not in the same month. So a lot of times people will be like, yeah, I did my renewal. I met with my case manager. I'm good. And they don't respond when they get a request for that financial renewal too. So make sure you're always doing both. Then the disability determination, when you get an initial determination, it will tell you how long it's good until. They call it your diary date. And when you hit that date, you have to prove that they still have a disability. It doesn't matter how obvious it is that they may not outgrow that disability. You still have to prove it every time you hit your diary date. So that diary date is usually either 1, 3, 5, or 7 years from when the initial application was submitted. And they make that decision based on how likely they think it might be for you to outgrow that disability. So if you have one that's a pretty obviously lifelong disability, then they'll usually make it every 7 years. But a lot of times, like babies, they'll only approve for 1 or 3 years because we don't really know what their development is going to look like long term. But even if it seems dumb and like nobody should be questioning that they're still disabled, you still have to prove it. And if you don't, you will get kicked off of everything. All right, some resources that might be helpful. So one is this waiver charts. There's an adult one and a kids one that the state made that kind of outlines for each of the waivers what the eligibility criteria is, and then lists all the services so you can see them side by side, which is fairly helpful. Developmental Pathways, one of the case management agencies, made this lovely acronym guide that I love. We talk in alphabet soup like crazy in this world. And so this acronym guide goes through all of those and we'll define them for you. Sorry, somebody just opened a door behind me and just about gave me a heart attack. And then this links to Medicaid's website that has more services about home and community-based waivers. So a whole variety of things. All right, last, we're here to help. You got connected to us somehow, found this presentation. If you have more needs, please feel free to reach out to us. I will say, see, I didn't put the email address for our main contact on here too. I can put it in the chat. Here's our main phone number. You can do info@familyvoicesco.org is our main email address. I'll also put my email on here and the email for Brenda, who is our bilingual family navigator. So if you've got people that speak only Spanish or would prefer to get help in Spanish, then Brenda is happy to help them with that as well. I will say you're welcome to email me. My email inbox looks a little nutty, so I may not get back to you super timely. So you might be better off reaching out to the main number or the main email address as well. All right. Any questions on these? Let me stop sharing this so that I can give you links to the things. And if I can make my computer work. While you all think, because multitasking is not always my strong suit. Copy link. All right. There you go. There's a link to the slide deck so you can click on all of the things and all the stuff. And then our main email address is info@familyvoicesco.org if you need that. Any last questions on Medicaid waivers, their processes, any of those sort of things? Yes, Jessica.
All right. Are we recording or do I have to be?
We are recording, yes.
All right. How often do you see a child with like level 1 autism getting on the CES waiver?
Very rarely. Um, Usually kids with level 1 autism end up fitting in like Medicaid buy-in for children with disabilities is like usually a more common fit for them. If somebody has level 1 autism and they like never sleep and they're up all night and the parents have to be up all night with them because they cause mischief of some sort or another when they're up unobserved, then maybe, but they would also have to have that low IQ or low adaptive skills. So, more likely if somebody has level 1 autism and severe ADHD and sensory and anxiety, like when you start to compile a lot of those diagnoses together, then sometimes when it's just level 1 autism is its only thing, they usually don't qualify because they don't need as many of those sort of services typically, or they're just trying to save those services for those that are kind of on the more significant needs end.
True. And one more.
Yep.
I was busy tending to kids when you said if they get that disability determination,
Mhm.
when do they have to renew that to see if it still kind of fits? When did you say it
Yeah.
happened?
So it'll say when you get the initial letter, it'll say when you have to redo it. So it's either 1 year later, 3 years, 5 years, or at most 7 years later. And they kind of decide when they approve it how many years they'll give it to you for. But on the letter, it'll say your diary date. That's when it has to be redone by. So it's important to kind of know that. Your case manager should also be able to look, or county human services should be able to look and tell you when the diary date is if you don't have that letter anymore. But they decide, and it's not the same for everybody.
Okay, so it's not like by age for like a young kid who's like 3 or 4, they, redo it every 2 years just to make sure. They just
Yeah,
decide when to.
it's not a set, and it's not like every kid has to redo it at 3. It's depends on the individual. Rarely, like if somebody's applying for a waiver when the kid is 2 months old, odds are against them approving it for 7 years because they're little, and kids change a lot between 2 months and 7. Like every kid changes a lot in that time frame. So usually when they're littler, they might approve it for less time, versus when they're older, have had the same diagnoses and the same needs for a longer period of time, then they'll approve it for a longer period. But I don't know. I think my kid was a year and a half and got it approved for 7 years the first time. So I don't make the decision. They make a decision. So
Okay. Thanks, Megan.
yeah, absolutely. I see Heather's question in the chat on CWCHN, who's providing the palliative care services. It's usually a nurse who comes out and provides that for the CWCHN. And it's through a Medicaid provided agency. Or an agency provides that for children. Yeah. So it's usually a nurse. I'm curious about CDOS. Not sure if I spelled it right. Yeah. So CDOS is a service that's available through Community First Choice now. It used to be available on multiple of the adult waivers, but not on any of the kids waivers. It stands for Consumer Directed Attendant Support Services. And it's another way of getting services. So kind of the general overview is those three services that I highlighted in red on the community first choice piece are personal care, homemaker, and health maintenance activities. And those three services each have three different ways you can get them. So one is agency based, and that's like your standard, there's an agency who hires you to provide homemaker, and they pay you a set rate for providing homemaker, and you work a set hours and you clock in and you clock out, and you document whatever homemaker tasks you did during that time. Same for personal care. And then for skilled care, so medical care, under that model you have to be a CNA or a nurse to provide that care. There's another program called IHSS that kind of bundles those three things together. And so you're an IHSS employee and you would do some homemaker tasks, some personal tasks, and then those skilled nurse and CNA level tasks you would do under something called health maintenance activities, where you don't have to be a nurse or a CNA to provide them. But under IHSS, you still work for an agency. So a home health agency is your employer. You do timesheets with them. You document what care you provided to them, and they bill Medicaid. And Medicaid pays them, and they take their cut out of the Medicaid rate to pay for their admin staff and their nurses and their liability insurance and all of their other employment costs and potentially their profit, depending on the company, and then pay their employees out of whatever's left of that Medicaid reimbursement that they got. Okay, then there's the world of CDOS. So in CDOS, there is no agency. So there's no home health agency that you're employed by. You're employed by either the Medicaid member, if they're an adult who's able to manage their own care, or you're employed by the authorized representative for that member. But when you get like your W-2 at the end of the year, it will have listed as the employer that person's name. So they're actually your employer. And then instead of them billing Medicaid for 3 hours of homemaker and 2 hours of personal care and then paying you out of that amount, the state takes all the hours that they would qualify for services. So say you were evaluated and got 2 hours a day of personal care, 2 hours a day of homemaker, and 5 hours a day of health maintenance. Then they would plug all those into this calculator that would give you a monthly budget. So essentially, if the state was paying out all of those, how much would they be paying to that home health agency? And it's slightly off, but roughly how much they would be paying that home health agency. And they give that to you as a budget instead. And then you get to decide within that budget how much you want to pay people per hour and how many hours you're going to pay and what they're going to do within those 3 tasks. So they can't like shovel snow for you. That doesn't count in personal care, homemaker, health maintenance. It has to be those type of tasks. But then you get to choose how many hours you're going to use, how much you're going to pay per hour. And as long as you stay under that monthly budget, then they can do that. So if somebody would qualify for 10 hours at $20 an hour, you could still do that under CDOS and do 10 hours at $20 an hour, though you'll have a little bit more money because there's none going to the home health agency. So you actually end up with more money in the end going to the actual people providing care. Or you could say, I don't want to do 10 hours at $20 an hour. I can't find anybody who's going to provide care for $20 an hour. So you could say, it's worth it to me to not get all 10 hours, to have somebody else provide that care for free or whatever else is going to happen. I'm only going to use 5 hours, but I'm going to pay $40 an hour instead because I can get somebody to come do the care for $40 an hour. So you've got a lot of flexibility within that under CDOS. And then those care providers have to do timesheets. So they have to say when they clocked in and when they clocked out. And then any other documentation about what they provided is between them and the authorized representative or them and the member. So there's no set charting that has to be done. It's timesheets and then whatever the member authorized representative asks them to do. Parents can provide care under CDOS, but the authorized representative cannot provide care or be paid to be the authorized representative. So like me as mom, I can't be a care provider for my kiddo and the authorized representative. I either need to find other people to provide care and I can be the authorized representative, or I need to find somebody else that wants to be the authorized representative, which is unpaid and volunteer position. And then I can be a care provider. So you just can't do both. But yes, a parent is allowed to be under CDOS. It's kind of some administrative paperwork that is for the authorized representative in particular. They have training they have to do. They have some crazy math documents that they have to do all the calculations for everything. To get everything up and started is kind of a lot of work. But then once it's up and started, then they really just have to make sure they're scheduling care providers in a way that won't make them go over their monthly budget and then approving timesheets. And so it's not a ton of work once everything's up and started and you've kind of got a routine to it, but it can be kind of a pain to get up and started. Yes, so theoretically, Like one parent could be the authorized representative and the other can be the care provider. Under CDOS, you do have to have two care providers listed, at least two care providers listed. They don't both have to be actively providing care, but you have to have somebody to be like a backup. So, like for one of my kiddos, my husband is the care provider, I'm the authorized representative, and my mom is our backup care provider. So she doesn't provide regular care, but if she comes and babysits, then she's actually providing all of the personal care and health maintenance that he needs during that time. And so she can work under CDOS during that. So you have to have a second person, but they don't have to have like regular consistent hours either. So, um, yes. And the authorized representative doesn't have to be a parent. It could be a grandparent, it could be a friend, it could be a neighbor. It just has to be somebody who knows the member, so knows the Medicaid, the person that's on Medicaid, and is willing to do all of that management and take the responsibility themselves, and do the training and stuff too. There is some like kind of liability within that too. So like if I mess up and schedule our care providers to go way over our monthly budget, the state will pay out to a certain amount and take it out of what I can pay future months. But if I go over even further, then I'm liable to pay it out. So I have to pay those care providers out of my own pocket because I didn't manage the budget correctly. So there is some like level of responsibility that you're taking as an authorized representative. So it probably shouldn't be like Joe who lives next door who you never really talk to. It should be somebody who's involved in their system, but they don't have to live in Colorado. They don't have to be a family member. They just have to be an adult and be willing to do it. And yes, it tends to be you can pay higher rates because you're getting what the home health agency was getting for their kind of overhead because you're taking on that responsibility yourself as the authorized representative. So you have more money to pay to actual care providers. And you can more easily get other people to help. I don't know about you all, but it's really, really hard to find somebody who's going to come provide homemaker for $20 an hour because cleaning companies charge a lot more than that. Individual cleaners tend to charge a lot more than that. And so under CDOS, I can pay them what they charge if they're willing to jump through the hoops to be an employee and stuff, and just use fewer hours and get that higher pay. So it ends up kind of being worth it in the end, um, even though it's a lot of administrative burden to take on. Other questions? Yes, Jessica, go ahead.
All right. So with all the new limits and stuff, I know homemaker went down, and there's certain things that just went down with the governor's budget. Sorry. Yes, baby. Let me step outside. Okay. So with the direct care services calculator and CDOS, how are those new limitations directed, like when you're doing CDOS compared to IHSS?
Yeah. So, yeah. And it's all has a lot that is to be determined. So we don't have all the answers yet. As things are right now with the proposals, some of the limits are on the individual member, so that are proposed for the individual member. And so those limits will limit the number of hours that can go into that CDOS budget. So to create your budget for CDOS, they look at how many personal care, how many homemaker, how many health maintenance. So if right now you qualified for 40 hours of homemaker a week, that's a lot. I don't know that anybody qualifies for that many, but theoretically, you qualify for 40 hours a week. Then when they create the CDOS budget, you're getting a much bigger budget to compensate for those 40 hours. Even if you don't use it as 40 hours, those 40 hours are what would make your budget. So when they say a member can only get 3 hours of homemaker per day, then now you can't get that 40 hours that goes into your CDOS budget. Only 21 hours will go into the CDOS budget. So your budget will end up being less because of those. The limits on caregivers, so like the proposed like 56 hours per week or the proposed 16 hours per day or the 16 hours per day that's actually already in place apply to people on CDOS, but you have some more flexibility that you can work fewer hours at a higher rate in order to kind of figure out those limits and where you're going to land within those limits. However, you have to pay all of your people comparably. So if you have somebody who's coming in and providing some help with that care, your backup person or somebody else, you can't say, I'm going to pay this person $20 an hour and I'm going to pay my spouse $50 an hour because that violates labor laws. Unless you can justify why your spouse is that much more qualified, you're going to have a really hard time justifying that and they'll push back on it. So you have to do things comparable to each other. And so that sort of prevents you from just going off the rails and paying yourself the highest rate you possibly can, which is like $58 an hour and taking really few number of hours because that's not the goal of the program, but you do have more flexibility in CDOS to use fewer hours at a higher rate, whether it's a parent or anybody else providing that care.
Right, because I was just wondering, I was like, well, with the direct care services calculator, what good is it going to be now? Because, my son does qualify for a pretty decent amount of homemaker because, he
Mhm.
grows food and whatnot. And so now I'm like, well, what's the point of having all these hours unless we go through CDOS and they actually pay for that, and then I can use that to pay somebody for those extra hours to come clean.
Yeah.
Okay, so it
But
applies
the
in CDOS.
hours that'll go into your CDOS budget will not just be infinite too. So
Right.
those limits will apply to those hours going into that budget as well. But
Okay.
there's a lot of space between 0 homemaker and 21 homemaker. So the calculator is doing something there still, but it's just putting an upper limit on what is allowed there too.
Right. Well, I like what you said in that different meeting about the soft caps. There
Yeah.
might be exceptions, you
There
know.
will be some sort of exception process. We don't know what it is. I don't think it's actually been developed yet, but there will be some sort of exception process.
All right. Good to know. Thanks again.
Yep. Other questions? All right.